of a silo between monitoring and evaluation, and we have the data sets and the insights from monitoring which are used in the evaluations, but generally these two areas and the set of data sets do not talk to each other. However, technology is completely changing this entire landscape, as we can see right now. So because of this granular high frequency data collection possibilities which are emerging because of this entire digitization process, not just the fact that monitoring is changing in itself, the line between monitoring and evaluation is also getting blurred. We are seeing that this high frequency, granular, high quality data can now be used in the real time, not just for better monitoring, but in conjunction with survey can significantly change the way evaluations are also going to be done. So before we get into specifics of what technological change are we referring to here and how does DGQI fit into that, I'll take a step back and talk about what administrative data is and what are some of its characteristics. So generally, administrative data is any form of programmatic data or MIS data which is collected in either in the process of implementation of a program or a scheme, or let's say, for example, the data which is available on the MIS systems, the management information systems of the NREGA scheme, or the data which is generated as a part of individuals who are complying to certain regulations which are set out by the government, or the data which is generated in the process of government providing certain services to individuals or entities. Or it also includes data sets which are more of the data sets which are generated for implementation of public administration, which are more of statistics like crime statistics, deaths, and so on and so forth. All of these are administrative data sets. Admin data typically tends to be regular, much more high frequency than survey data. It tends to be mostly on a universal coverage basis as against a sample basis, and generally covers information from inputs, activities and outputs. However, at DMEO, Niti Aayog, through the output outcome monitoring framework, we are in the process of stretching it to also ensure that admin data is used for outcomes based monitoring for various government programs. Next slide, please. So with that understanding of admin data, now let us look at what technological change are we talking about when we say technology. So generally, if you look at, this is the phases of various government technological revolution that we have seen in India. In the 90s, we saw a cycle of what we call computerization or digitization. So all our records, all our administrative data which used to be on paper became digitized. Second, the important phase that started around 2008 and is still continuing is the GovTech Revolution 2.0. And here we saw that individual schemes and programs got digitized, or service delivery of public programs got digitized end to end, and it basically generated MIS systems with dashboards at the front which were guiding the decision making for the policymakers. Now, what we are likely to see in the next few years, because of various emerging technologies and the use of unconventional data sets in M&E, as well as because of this entire idea around open digital ecosystems. So here, unlike siloed singular MIS systems representing one scheme, we will have an ecosystem of data sets which are available and which will talk to each other across the various silos of the government. That is where we see that a lot of potential will get unlocked, and when that data exchange becomes seamless, and on top of it, if you can envision the usage of various technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and as far as the data collection process is concerned, think of IoT and various other technologies, that entire process is going to revolutionize the way data is captured, exchanged, and used. And that is going to impact M&E a lot. However, for this transition to happen from GovTech 2 to 3, it is important that our administrative data sets are prepared for these transitions, and we are going about this preparation in a very, very structured manner. To be able to do that, structured exercise is what DGQI is essentially trying to do. However, what it tries to do is this entire process of administrative data sets. If you look at the way these admin data sets exist right now, there are various problems that they have. A, They do not have standard data schema. They often do not have metadata standards. There are no seamless data exchange protocols often. And also, the process of data collection is not completely leveraging the available emerging technologies. And in addition to that, what is also happening is the data use, even whatever data is already available, we are not completely using it fully. So those are the various symptoms that we see in the administrative data systems in India. And the underlying root causes essentially are A, the fact that our human resources, especially in area of data analytics, are really limited. B, we have policies which are either not completely implemented on the ground, or in certain cases policies are still in the process of being developed. And third, the most important thing is there are not enough regular processes which ensure full utilization of the available data to begin with. So these are the underlying root causes, and this transition from GovTech 2 to GovTech 3 using these administrative data sets for better decision making is what DGQI aims to translate into. And now we'll look at how exactly that will happen. Kunjan?
So considering the various numerous challenges that are presently faced by Indian in the context of use of Indian administrative data for evidence-based policy making, it was realized that there was a need for to undertake an exercise which will enable a comprehensive review of data maturity levels of different schemes, different programmatic interventions, and different ministries of Government of India on a standard framework, so that we could see which ministry lies where and accordingly trigger action. Next slide. So with this overall objective, next slide, the data governance quality index exercise was launched by the Government of India in the year 2020. So the overall vision of the exercise is that right now the administrative data which sits in different silos, to break those data silos, which will help in creating an open data ecosystem. So this open data ecosystem, when it gets created, it will enable synergistic use of this data by policymakers to ensure that there is improved evidence-based policy making across Government of India. And in this process, this data will also be used to ensure seamless delivery of services to citizens till the last mile via digital methods. So with this overall objective, underlying this overall vision, the DGQI exercise was launched with 4 main objectives. The first objective was to prepare a self-assessment diagnostic tool, a kind of a self-assessment survey, which can be used by ministries to identify why there is a need to improve their current data systems and what are the current gaps in these data systems of their programmatic interventions. Then, using the information which is provided in these self-assessment, create a sort of an index framework, which is a standard framework on the basis of which we can compare, assess, and review the data preparedness levels across ministries, so that we can identify which ministries and which schemes are doing better and which ones need and which ones are there where there is a significant need for improvement. Then, based on this measurement and self-contemplation, the third objective was to enable the ministries to undertake necessary reforms to improve this DGQI score and improve their data maturity levels. And in this process, support the ministries by creating an enabling atmosphere for them. And the final fourth objective was that in this process, a lot of best practices, a lot of good practices in data generation, data analytics, and its use in evidence-based policy making will come up. And to enable peer learning, the exercise also aimed to document and disseminate these best practices among ministries and states of Government of India, so that they can learn from each other. Next slide. So in order to meet these overall objectives, the data governance quality index exercise relies on 2 main arms. The architecture has 2 main arms. The first one is measurement of data maturity levels of ministries and their programmatic interventions on a regular basis. And the second arm is to use this measurement to drive action to improve the data maturity levels. Both these arms are actually linked together via a high level mandate, which is continuously encouraging ministries to undertake regular measurement and keep the momentum of the reforms going on. So if we focus on the first arm now, which is on measurement, as I mentioned, a standard yet comprehensive framework was first of all developed so that different type of schemes, some are infrastructure schemes, some are social sector schemes, some are research scheme, all these different type of interventions that are undertaken by Government of India, and consequently they have different type of data systems, they collect different types of data. All such interventions can be, the data maturity levels of all such interventions can be assessed using a standard yet comprehensive framework. The second aspect was to administer this framework or administer this survey in self-assessment mode rather than an external evaluation. So we circulated this self-assessment questionnaire for the ministries to themselves fill up. The main principle behind this self-assessment exercise was to ensure that the whole exercise is self-reflective and action guiding by the ministries, so that the ministries are not seeing it as an external evaluation of their data systems, but they're instead using it to drive their own actions, and also to ensure that the spirit of the whole exercise and the whole index is not to make comparisons between ministries and schemes, but to actually guide reform actions in order to improve the schemes which may not be doing so well right now, by peer learning from schemes which are doing better in terms of the data systems. Then if we look at the second arm, which is the action. So based on the exhaustive measurement that was done under the first arm, obviously each ministry will have to undertake its own set of reform actions based on where it is. But overall, DGQI tried to create an enabling atmosphere, it tried to create an enabling atmosphere for ministries by embedding some structural reforms that must be undertaken by all ministries. So the first point was here to come up with processes that would need to be undertaken by ministries to improve their data maturity levels. So this under this planning processes part, we encouraged all the ministries to develop their own action plan or data strategy, where they would enlist what are their current gaps and how they would go about overcoming these gaps in order to move to better data maturity levels. Then the second aspect, in order to implement this action plan, in order to develop this action plan in a holistic manner by coordinating with all other divisions within a ministry, an institutional structure was required. So a data and strategy unit was proposed to be set up by all ministries in the form of an institutional structure which will steer the overall development, implementation and tracking of the action plans on a regular basis. The third part, finally, when the necessary institutions and processes have been set up, the resources which will at the ground level, which will ultimately implement all these reform actions for different programmatic interventions, it was necessary that we build their capacities in the field of data analytics and data use, and therefore the third third action was to focus on capacity development of human resources for undertaking necessary reforms that would be required to improve the data maturity levels by ministries. So this way we had a measurement which was used to define reform actions by ministries, and then once these action reforms were undertaken, these were also made a part of the measurement, and regular progress on whether the action plan is being implemented, whether capacity development is undertaken, whether DSU has been set up, all this was also made a part of the measurement itself, the index itself, so that it is also regularly feeding into the progress of the index, and it is also it is ensuring the momentum of the reforms that are being undertaken under this exercise. So with this idea of the overall objectives and architecture of DGQI, we'll now see what was the scope and the framework we used to assess different ministries using this framework.
Thanks, Kunjan. Now we'll go into what are the key constituents of this two-pronged approach. The first being an assessment of data maturity levels, and the second being how we will enable reforms in the short and the long term. So in terms of its horizontal scope, the exercise casts a wide net. In terms of coverage, we cover about 74 ministries and departments at the central level, and all of their key development programs or schemes therein. And these can be of two types. We have CS, which is central sector schemes, and we have centrally sponsored schemes. And they can also have non-schematic interventions, which can be over and above such schemes, for example, sectoral dashboards, etc. So given the 74 ministries and departments, our coverage is at about 630 such schemes and development programs. We are also covering approximately 80% of the financial outlay for these key development programs of these ministries and departments that have been covered, amounting to 35 lakh data points, which is 3.5 million data points of these ministries and departments. Next slide, please. In terms of its vertical scope, the exercise is not just vast in its coverage, it is also covering in-depth questions of the programmatic aspects of data governance in each ministry and department that is being covered. So we have 95 questions in 12 themes across 3 pillars. The first is data strategy, and this is assessed at a holistic ministry or department level, where we are looking at whether or not there is an institutional architecture to facilitate the creation of reforms as well as the implementation of proper data quality governance. The first is, of course, the DSU, which has been mandated according to the DGQI exercise, as well as a detailed action plan of how it will be operationalized and how the vision, mission, and strategy of data governance in the ministry will come to the fore. So this has 20% weightage. This is also accompanied by data-driven outcomes, which is also 20% of the score. And this is also done at the ministry or department level. So here we try to assess whether or not there is synergy within departments in the ministry in terms of whether or not data is being shared with each other for a larger vision or mandate of the projects that are being implemented. If there is any collaboration with internal or external agencies in terms of data sharing, whether or not we are moving beyond descriptive analytics to exploratory and prescriptive analytics to link evidence to actual policy making in the country, and also documenting any good practices that the ministry or department may want to highlight, which would help us create an ecosystem of sharing and knowledge creation. After this, we are also going to the programmatic interventions themselves, the schemes, and at the schematic or the non-schematic intervention level, we are looking at 6 key themes. The first is data generation. So how is data being generated? Is it digital? Is it done on paper, etc.? And if data is being collected digitally, what are the mechanisms that exist to assess data quality once the data is actually coming in? Are there any predefined protocols, etc.? Is it done manually? Is it in hybrid mode, or is it automated entirely? Post which we are looking at how this data is actually analyzed and used in policy making, how it is disseminated internally and externally, how technology is actually harnessed in improving key aspects of program implementation as applicable. So it could be whether or not satellite data can be harnessed, blockchain for the creation of caste certificates, etc., wherever applicable as per the mandate of the ministry or department being covered. We're also looking at key provisions of privacy and data security, such as anonymization and risks for re-identification. What is the current capacity in the ministry or department which is dedicated to that particular scheme? What is the scope for expansion, and also data management such as cloud storage, etc. So this is the meat of the self-assessment questionnaire because it covers 60% of the total weightage. Next slide, please. One key enabler of this entire exercise is the dashboard that has been created to track progress over time. There is this common data architecture, and key features, of course, are the self-assessment questionnaire that are filled out, which is filled out by ministries and departments. A strategy as against action points is also tracked. So we're looking at how the ministry or department may have made progress against its own action points in timelines. A scoring that is generated on the basis of the responses that are collected through the questionnaire, key visualizations in certain thematic areas and pillars of the self-assessment tool, and there's a provision for performance and compliance reports as well. The other key arm of this DGQI exercise, in addition to the self-assessment questionnaire, is the identification of gaps and subsequently coming to terms with what sort of reforms can be enabled in the short and long term to improve data quality governance in the country and also specific to ministries and departments. So one key lever of change is the creation of an action plan, which intends to be an exhaustive strategy with execution plans and timelines, and regular tracking of these action plans is also done on the DGQI dashboard. This has to be accompanied by the institutional architecture of a data and strategy unit, which is mandated as part of the DGQI exercise. And this intends to be a cross-functional unit that harnesses existing capacities and also brings in new capacities to break silos that may exist within ministries because they have different scheme divisions, and also to streamline monitoring and evaluation data and technology needs, and to link evidence to policy making. And underlying all of these aspects is, of course, a subsequent investment in capacity development and capacity augmentation in the creation of a dedicated cadre of data analytics professionals, and also to create buy-in and knowledge among the government service delivery professionals across the country, and to also upgrade existing capabilities. The DSU is proposed to subsume within it 4 key units. The first is the monitoring unit, which would be integral in integrating the different initiatives and schematic divisions across the ministry or department to look at monitoring across schemes and to break silos. This would also be accompanied by a statistics unit, which would be integral to the identification of the overall statistical needs of the ministry and department, the generation of key metrics and sharing with others, and of course coordination with external and internal agencies. A technology unit would also come in because we need to ensure that we move towards digitizing all of our schemes to 100%, unification of data systems, as well as any dashboards which operate in parallel. Of course, and integrating with the latest technologies, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, blockchain, etc., wherever applicable and possible. A data analytics unit would also be necessary for undertaking and promoting data analysis, moving above and beyond descriptive analytics to move towards even causal analysis if time permits, and using data to drive policy decisions in the ministry or department. The action plan itself has key constituents. The first is the background. So a brief overview is provided by the ministry or department. What is their current degree of digitization? What is the background and baseline against which they're going to propose reforms? What are the reflections of the ministry and department on this current status quo? Alongside what is the vision, mission, and objectives of improving data governance in the ministry or department, and alongside what is the strategy that they propose to improve the DGQI score. So the DGQI score, on the basis of the questionnaire that is filled out by the ministry or departments, ranges from 0 to 5. So we are hoping that we are able to help ministries and departments achieve a frontier score of 5.0. So within this, the action plan will focus on what is the scope of this strategy, what is the overall approach that ministries and departments will take, and also delve into scheme-wise action plans and non-schematic interventions. This will also be accompanied by the functional aspects of this action plan, such as the financial resources that would be dedicated towards implementation, as well as HR capacity, etc. Next slide, please. Now I'll hand over to my colleague Vinu.
Right. Thank you very much, Anmol. So having looked at, the broad scope of DGQI and the method which we've employed to calculate this, we'll now talk about the core value that DGQI can deliver to different kinds of monitoring and evaluation institutions, and how such organizations can actually contextualize this tool to build a stronger interoperable data ecosystem for their own institutions. So the first kind of use case that we'll be looking at is focused on M&E organizations at literally the apex level. So for the public sector, it will include all the planning departments at the national or subnational level, which also often house the M&E organizations within themselves. And if we look at from the multilateral side, this will have all the specialized M&E offices of organizations like the United Nations or the Asian Development Bank, which have specific offices catering to their M&E needs. The second use case that we'll delve on in the next section, in this section, is focused on organizations which have multiple program divisions. So this will include all the central ministries or departments at the subnational level. From the multilateral side, it will include our donor agencies, such as the World Food Programme or UNICEF, which usually have multiple field offices in countries. This use case will also cater to the non-profit sectors or the non-government organizations, which primarily function as aid partners with the bigger, which are really big in size. For example, the Gates Foundation or the Tata Trust. The third use case that we'll talk about is focused on the implementing organizations, which have specific implementing mandates or for specific missions. So, for example, from the government side, in India, we have what is called the National Health Authority, which is the apex body responsible for mandating one flagship program of the government of India called the Ayushman Bharat Yojana. Jan Arogya Yojana, and this has been interested with not just designing the strategy for this, but also technological infrastructure, implementation on ground, in order to create this whole digital health ecosystem in the country. So all of these implementing agencies can also use DGQI, as we'll showcase in our slides, to cater to their digital ecosystem needs. And this category of the use case will also include grassroots organizations and unions, such as Udan India, which works with underprivileged children on ground, or the Smile Foundation, which works for educating young girls. So these organizations can also use this tool um, for their purposes. Next slide, please. Right. So now we'll delve deeper into each of these three use cases for different kinds of organizations, which I just mentioned. So the first use case here is for organizations which have the primary mandate to conduct monitoring activities and evaluate programs at the national or international level. So we understand that the top planning or the M&E institutions, they often need to analyze and use data sets from various other departments, which handle, of course, different sectors. So they need to bring in data systems from these different departments together to track performance against common goals, the sustainable development goals, for example. So such analysis is done through triangulation of data sets, which can then be used for making more informed planning decisions. And this can be easily done through integration of data systems, but that is typically difficult because the systems across these sub organizations or the sub offices or departments are really siloed. So they don't operate together, they don't talk to each other, and this hinders their effective use of the data that they generate for regular monitoring and planning decisions. So what the M&E or the planning bodies at the national level or for the multilaterals can do is they can customize and use DGQI to conduct a comparative assessment of the data systems of their departments. And for this, they will have to add necessary questions, edit some of the questions to identify if the data systems that they're currently tracking track all of the sectoral indicators that they need to take planning decisions. And after this tweaking of the DGQI questionnaire is done, then this can be canvassed online in order to solicit responses from various departments. And based on the responses they get, then a comprehensiveness of the data systems can be measured, and theme-wise areas for improvement can then be identified. So the core value that DGQI brings to such bodies is the synergistic use of data in order to track their broad sectoral outcomes or their performance against the SDGs. And what the impact this would create is it will help in peer learning within the departments, and also standardization of data systems, which can then be analyzed together in order to take decisions. And apart from measurement, the whole overall DGQI implementation architecture can enable the planning departments under the national or the international organizations to steer their multiple line departments towards improved data governance in a very focused manner. Next slide, please. Next, we look at organizations with multiple program divisions, each of which focuses on different interventions. So these organizations, what they need is a reliable, good quality, and timely data on the performance of their intervention from these sub-departments. For instance, the donor agencies, which are now rapidly moving towards more performance-based budgeting, they want to know where their interventions are actually creating a better impact. So they want to put in their money there for better accountability of their expenditure. And for this, they would require their program divisions to at least annually report data on the basic output and outcome indicators, which then can be utilized for periodic reviews and strategic decisions. For example, for funding or expenditure can then be taken basis this data. And but for this, what this performance data that is needed for these organizations for budgeting or impact measurement can be a struggle, both in the government and even outside. So to overcome these challenges, these large flagging organizations can use DGQI to conduct a comparative assessment of the processes which govern data quality of the different data streams across these various program divisions, which simultaneously report data to them. And this will improve the reliability of data, give them confidence, especially the divisional heads or financial advisors who are taking decisions on financial interventions or how much money to really aid and give to a particular program, the confidence to use this kind of performance data for their decisions. And what will happen in the long run is that this will demonstrate not just accountability, but also transparency of how decisions are taken in these organizations. But how can this be done? So the DGQI questionnaire can actually be, can we move over to the previous slide, please? Yes. So again, talking about the organizations which have multiple program divisions, how can they use DGQI? So basically, they need to customize in order to add very specific questions basis their need. So, for example, the use of how the data is being used for quality checks by the sub offices, and for tracking or optimizing their sectoral inputs, which are majorly for fund agencies money that they put into their programs, and also realizing their outcomes, which can also be linked to broader international sustainable development outcomes. So they can also look at the kind of indicators which are currently being tracked in the MIS systems and check if the data is being collected on all the indicators to just look at the comprehensiveness of what is being collected. So then after this customization is done, the responses they can sort online using canvassing the whole questionnaire online, and this will allow for measurement of quality systems, and in case there are fault lines, then the forms can be initiated accordingly. So what this will allow these organizations to do is have a better inter-office or department standardization on data quality, harmonize their reforms across the sub-offices, and have better program design and funding to their priority key sectoral outcomes or focus areas. Next slide, please. Yes. So finally, we look at how the implementing organizations or the grassroots organizations which have a mandate to implement a particular program as part of their own agenda, or help out bigger organizations, bigger aid institutions to carry out programs. How can they use DGQI? So typically, such organizations are responsible for implementing or monitoring a particular program or scheme or intervention, and they need to oversee day-to-day implementation of such programs and also make mid-course corrections of the programs that they're implementing. So like the examples I gave, these kind of organizations working on the ground would typically include NGOs and not-for-profit sector organizations. And these kind of organizations, they often very typically struggle with reliable data, which is available to them at the right granularity or frequency to be able to take decisions out of the insights emerging from that data. So this is the typical worry area. Now, the DGQI toolkit can be helpful for such organizations to self-assess themselves on various parameters of data management. And this will help them identify areas of improvement, their capacity gaps, and also help digitize their systems in a very coherent manner, which can collect high quality data and aid them in their day-to-day implementation work. They can also then use this tool as a way to identify what all data they're collecting, how can they collect it better and use it better while optimizing their reporting burden, if at all, if they have to report data on certain output indicators or even activity indicators to bigger organizations. For example, in case of an NGO which is in charge of implementing a program, it can add questions on the use of data for improving last mile delivery, for example. And then this can be further linked to fund releases, to process management, on how they can better optimize their program delivery on ground. And what this will allow these implementing organizations to do is to identify the capacity gap and also diagnose and prioritize the reforms which are able to fill up those gaps. Next slide, please. Right. So, having looked at how different organizations, both at the national level, international level, the multilaterals, the implementing agencies, can customize the whole DGQI tool, we will look at the broad steps needed for this contextualization based on the characteristics of the organization and their needs. But broadly, all these organizations, they need to begin by understanding the objectives as has been outlined by my team in this presentation, the architecture, the methodology of this exercise, the framework and the associated self-assessment questionnaire then needs to be suitably customized, as I just explained, to suit the needs of the particular organization which wants to use this tool. Now, this adoption can include modification and questions, also the options which we have enlisted in each of the questions. Some of, for example, there are options which include national level granularity. Now, these would not be applicable to, implementing agencies which are working primarily on field projects. You could also you may also need to remove some of the non-applicable questions which are more relevant to national policy and may not be then relevant to a lot of multilateral organizations. You may also add certain other questions which you deem fit. Then similarly, methodology may need to be suitably modified by the user agencies depending on their data requirements. And both these tools of this whole exercise, the methodology and the toolkit, which really gives you an idea of how you can customize and use it, is available on the DMEO website. So you can have a look at that as well. So once this questionnaire and methodology is finalized, we begin with the self-assessment exercise with the participating agencies. And this questionnaire needs to be canvassed online with dedicated credentials. What we need is active participation from all relevant stakeholders for different kinds of organizations who need to fill up the self-assessment questionnaire. And it is equally crucial to ensure that the participating agencies are well versed with the questionnaire and they understand the questions, the options very well. And for this, if needed, then training resources and videos in different formats, multilingual formats are also encouraged to be produced for this purpose. Then the next step is to use the baseline measurement to identify specific reform areas for each of the participating agencies once the questionnaire has been canvassed online at least once. So they must, these organizations for the baseline measurement, then they also need to develop a mechanism to regularly track the implementation of the action plans, which emerge out of, canvassing the questionnaire online. Action plan to just implement the reform areas and for better scoring in the next round. So then independent third-party audit can also be done for responses and action plan if there's a need. The last step is basically to embed the compliance against the timely implementation of the reform actions. And we also need to undertake exhaustive measurements on a regular basis and have regular reviews with participating agencies to discuss their performance. So in this way, what is being done is that the organizations are actually institutionalizing this exercise, and the thrust towards this exercise along with regular process reviews will be greater in the next round or in the subsequent rounds. And this is also one way to actually move towards how you can also incentivize some of your top performers, whether it's different program divisions within a bigger organization, in order to perform well. Next slide, please. Now, having looked at how the contextualization can be done and how it can be then canvassed online in order to gather insights on DGQI for various organizations, which look at some of the operational guidance. So there are some basic do's and don'ts while you adopt the framework for your own organization. Basically, the most important one is that this whole exercise needs to be a very collaborative exercise, where the questionnaire, the methodology, the tool, all needs to be born out of the need. Um, uh, all of this needs to be born out of various stakeholder consultations with the participating departments, or various sub offices of the departments and the agencies. And also, the focus of this whole self-assessment exercise of data preparedness has to be on data preparedness rather than on external evaluation, to just draw out rankings. That is not the purpose of this exercise. It has to be, again, a self-assessment tool for better data preparedness. Also, it is very important and critical that this exercise remains action oriented and deadline focused to drive out reforms in the data ecosystem within your own organization. Next slide, please. Thank you. I think with that, I'll hand it back to my colleagues for the next round of question and answers.
Thank you, Veenu, for the presentation. We will now take up the questions that were asked by the participants. So we have the first question. What is the rationale for the weights? I would request Gunjan to kindly answer the question.
Um, Thank you for the question. So as we try to describe during our presentation, we identified there are three main steps to achieving better data preparedness levels. The first is data strategy, where you lay down systemic guidelines to identify your current gaps and understand what you need to do to improve your data maturity level. So it's a sort of a systemic plan that you're laying down and ensuring you have the necessary processes, institutions, and human resources for that. So this therefore encompasses more of activities. Then the second step is data systems, where the results of undertaking these activities become visible in the form of better MIS systems with better data generation quality and other DGQI parameters. So these are the outputs. And finally, then the third step, where all of this is then being used to drive synergistic use of data, which is captured under the third pillar, data driven outcomes. So therefore, when we were attributing the weights to these three pillars, we felt that it was because the outputs are becoming most visible under the data systems pillar, which is not just showing the results of the activities, but also it is a very important precursor to ensuring data driven outcomes, and therefore it was given the maximum weight of 60%. And then the remaining weights remaining weight of 40% was equally divided between strategy and outcomes, and it was attributed to 20% each. Then within each pillar, we again had to divide weightages to each and every theme, and largely these theme wise weightages were decided on the basis of our interactions with ministries and evaluating what are the important components of our MIS system based on our continuous interaction with ministries departments for monitoring their schemes. So for example, in data systems, we need to first of all take care of data generation, data quality analysis, and then use of technology is more of an enabler. So therefore we give more weightages to the first three components and a little less weight to the use of technology. So this way the weights have been customized on the basis of the need of the system right now, largely coming from our continued experience of driving monitoring and evaluation with Indian ministries and departments. But having said that, if anybody else would like to contextualize DGQI for their purposes, it is recommended that they evaluate where they are. For example, if there is a state which is already having very advanced MIS systems and they already have a well-developed data strategy, so then they may attribute less weight to data strategy and systems and may give more weight to data driven outcomes. So therefore these kind of customizations can be done. Also dynamic allocations of weightages can also be considered. For example, if you are planning to achieve better data maturity levels in a span of 2 to 3 years, then initially we can focus more on activities and we can give more weight to data strategy. But as and when these activities, the results of these activities should become visible over a year, then data systems can be given more weightages, and then finally data driven outcomes can be given more weightages. So this way the weightages can also be kept dynamic.
So just to add, so essentially The key principle underlying everything that was mentioned by Gunjan right now is the fact that DGQI is essentially a tool to force either your own program divisions or ministries which are outside you, wherein you have jurisdiction in terms of policy making over them. The entire idea of DGQI is to force and push these ministries, encourage them to reach a better data maturity level. So it is action guiding. That is the key principle, and therefore the entire idea of weightages has to be decided keeping that in mind. What weightages will drive maximum action in the areas which needs maximum action at a point in time is the key decision making parameter while deciding the weightages. That's the bottom line.
Thank you, Gunjan and Anand. Our next question is, why add another tool when there are multiple methods already available and being used by various agencies? PMD ends up rendering various reports rather than focusing on program implementation. I would request Anand to kindly answer this question.
So, can you just clarify the PMD part? PMD, okay. Right. So essentially, the idea of coming up with this specific tool was we looked at multiple reference models, and you're right, there are various alternatives which are used to assess data maturity in different contexts, be it private or public, and we looked at the entire landscape of all such models. And then we realized that for the purpose of driving focused action in the context of where our Indian administrative data systems currently are, we would require a tool which learns from all of these models but also brings in a lot of elements of simple, elegant questions which are pertinent to our own situational understanding of where our MIS systems are in the government of India and how do we improve them to the next aspired level in a time bound manner. So therefore there was a need for this specific tool. Now, yes, as far as data collection is concerned, and I would like to clarify if it was not clear as a part of our presentation, DGQI does not take the performance data and build an index on it, like most of the other indices that you would see that NITI has. DGQI is basically a description of the process through which data is collected and is used. So the questions which we ask, like as was mentioned by Gunjan, whether your scheme collects data at the unit level or does it just collect data at the district level? How frequently does it collect the data? Is it collecting data in the real time or once in a year? So we are asking such questions which can broadly be classified as metadata, but basically metadata in the context of data descriptions or descriptions about the data streams. So therefore we are looking at that landscape and trying to improve the processes, and which is why action guiding principle is the key underlying thing here.
Thank you, Anand. We have another comment and a question. Sharing of data collected by DMU for DGQI with private partners may lead to breach of trust, as this was not disclosed while collecting data. The questionnaire also contains URLs disclosing to private players may expose the risk of hacking. Data safety is paramount and can't be compromised in the name of evaluation. Gunjan, would you answer the question?
We'd like to clarify here that the data that we have collected on the different data processes, different data systems that the ministry is adopting, for example, the URLs and different the granularity frequency at which it is collecting data, all these data that we have collected on the MIS of Government of India, I'd like to clarify that we are not disclosing any of this information or releasing this information to private players. What we are only trying to do via this webinar is, so therefore there is no security or privacy risk by undertaking such an exercise if any other party also wants to undertake such exercise. What we are only trying to do here is we are trying to disseminate the methodology and the structural approach that the TMO team at DGQI has adopted, so that different agencies, not just within the government but also outside the government, can undertake such an exercise for their own organizations if they want to improve their data maturity levels.
So I'll just pause here because this is extremely important. I presume this question is coming from someone who has already participated in the DGQ exercise. Most probably that person, that individual or that representative would be a representative from the Government of India Ministry. So to allay the concerns which have been raised here, I would like to very, very clearly point out that this webinar and all the toolkit and materials which are available on our DMEO website, it's just the methodology part of what we are trying to do. We have not disclosed anywhere any of the scores, any of the data that ministry has responded on the questionnaire, because that is something which is basically at this point in time a exercise which is being driven within the government to improve the performance of various ministries. The methodology part, however, and as the government agency which is the Apex Monitoring and Evaluation Office, we believe and we firmly stand by the fact that any such methodological approaches which are developed as a part of public investments at the Apex M&E body are a part of public good, and therefore the methodology, the approach should always be available for any other state governments or any other non-profit agencies who would want to utilize that approach, who would want to utilize that entire exercise, contextualize it in their own context, in their own specific organizational context, and apply that. So that is all that we are trying to do through this particular webinar and through various toolkits that we have shared in the open domain. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand. We have another question. Could you please elaborate on contextualization part? How do you suggest to undertake this work? I would request Veenu to kindly answer this question.
Right. Thanks, Aishwarya. And thanks for that question. I think it's a very important one because for DGQI to be used by various other external institutions, depending on the need and their own characteristics, this tool can be very effectively used to measure the kind of data preparedness they have within their own institutions and within the various implementing agencies that they deal with. So as I said, this is literally also the first step in order to use this tool for your own purpose and need. So basically, as my team explained, the whole DGQI questionnaire has different aspects and different
Veenu, we are losing your audio. Yeah. So, can you try once more, Veenu? Otherwise, maybe we'll respond. Yeah. So I think Veenu is not audible. I'll just go ahead and finish what Veenu was already mentioning. So basically, the key point of contextualization is, it is before even looking at the DGQI questionnaire, I think it is important for the organization to build its own goals in terms of where it wants to be in the area of data maturity and data governance. So those goals have to first start from what purpose are those goals supposed to help. Is it to improve the fact that you have different divisions which are handling data in different ways and you want to just standardize them and enable seamless exchange between them so that someone at the top can have a better decision making? Or is it the goal of the organization that they are just implementing a certain program and they have field offices on the ground and those field offices are handling data in a very, very different context. I mean, very, very differently. And you want to make sure that that process is standardized so that at your own individual program division level, you have standardized data governance practices. So it all depends on those contexts. So that identification of the objective of why would you want to apply DGQI is first. Once you identify that, rest of the process is relatively simpler, because then you would know that if that is the context and that is where you want to reach, then what is the change that needs to be made in the standardized framework. Our framework basically provides a kind of a complete canvas of all the options in terms of questions, themes, and everything. Mostly the organizations implementing such a framework will have to not add, but mostly think of what questions are not relevant or not applicable to their context. And once that has been decided, once the questionnaire has been decided and the themes and their applicability has been decided, then you can decide on the weightages. And weightages we already answered, depends on which area of work. Let's say some organization is weak in quality control of data. There, the questions and themes related to that can have a greater weightage. Let's say some other organization is weak on use of technology, then that theme can have a greater weightage, because ultimately the purpose is to get work done. So accordingly, you can finalize the weightages, finalize the questionnaire, canvas it, and then it's equally important that not just measure, but also have a plan to get those translated into reforms and actions, for which our action plan templates and institutional structure templates can be helpful.
Thank you, Anand. Our next question is, what role end users of a government scheme can play in nurturing a data governance ecosystem? Does the DGQI toolkit provide for involvement of end users? I would request Anand to kindly respond.
Right. So the entire point of view from which DGQI was driven was to make sure that the design of the data systems, administrative data systems, moves increasingly towards the point at which you not just have data available on demand for centralized decision making, but also for decentralized action at the ground level by the implementing agencies, and then ultimately democratize data at the hands of the end users for improved policy push from their side. So that's the vision which DGQI no doubt eventually looks to move these administrative data systems towards. But as a tool, it is primarily a tool to help the centralized designers of these administrative data systems to design it in a way that the goal can be achieved. End users, we do have questions at the level in the DGQI questionnaire, which basically ask whether, let's say, things like social audit are being used for improving the quality of the data which is being reported. Now that is where we are saying that the end users need to be engaged, and those are specific to certain questions, but not completely covering the entire landscape of things that may be applicable to end users.
Thank you, Anand. We have a few questions in the chat box, and we will be responding to those questions via email. I thank all the participants for joining the session and understanding the data governance quality index model. All the DGQI related material is available on our DMO website, the link for which has been shared in the Q&A box for all the participants to access. Thank you once again.
Yeah, and in case we also put in the links to the toolkit and everything, so please keep referring to them for further customizations.
So, thank you everyone for joining us. It was a great session. Thank you for actively participating and posting questions.
Thanks everyone.